Let's talk some Torah. Parshat Bemidbar is based in the desert. That's in fact what it's called, Bemidbar, in the desert of Sinai. And we find ourselves just on the edge of entering into the land. And of course, there are two books of the Torah left. So Bemidbar tells the story of our growing up as a nation, the rebellions, the struggles, the leadership models. And then in Devarim, we tell the story again. It's very powerful to have such attention paid to who we are, where we were, how we behaved, and it's an unflinching picture. In fact, the Haftorah that we read for Parshat Bemidbar this coming Shabbat is from the book of Hosea. It's not a gentle story. It's about relationships that rupture. The example of Hosea and Gomer, very complicated story, is very much about the tribulations that can happen even in covenantal relationship. And what I'd like to share is actually a beautiful piece of Torah that was written by Rabbi Michal Springer, who's an incredible pastoral presence. She does a lot of healing work, training clergy of all faiths to be present as pastors and chaplains. She quotes a midrash that tells mystically of the story that God attempted to create a world a few times before this one that we have. And it points to the rabbinic uncertainty regarding the stability of reality. The world feels shaky. In 70 CE, the temple in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash, was destroyed for the second time. And from that point on, until, and maybe even really now, until the founding of the third Jewish Commonwealth that we call the State of Israel, Jewish thought has always been centered on the impermanence of things. Even the theological approach to God, the covenantal idea, a lot of this shakes. And in fact, in the book of Hosea that we read this Shabbat as the Haftorah, there's a section where God says, Verastichli le'olam, I will espouse you to me forever. But that's the kind of promise that, in fact, as Rabbi Springer points out in a beautiful comment on this week's Parsha, it's hard to maintain. How can any kind of covenantal relationship, and here she speaks about marriage and divorce, how can any kind of covenantal promise be made without acknowledging the fragility of any kind of promise? You know, in Jewish tradition, we have many moments where we undo the promises we've made, most famous of which is Kol Nidre. On Yom Kippur, we seek to free ourselves from the failure of mistakes that we've made because we promised to do better, we weren't able, we're going to promise again. And it's so powerful to see that these promises, even in the context of Jewish thought, are understood as requiring something of us. I can't make a covenantal promise and assume it's going to last. And in fact, as Rabbi Springer points out, the ketubah that we use in Jewish weddings is the promise of covenantal relationship. But the point of the ketubah, at least in its origin, was to ensure the safety of a woman in case her husband died or there was a divorce. And why would you include, asks Rabbi Springer, in the moment of covenantal building, making the promise itself, where would you include, why would you include the fragility of the relationship, if not to remind us how important it is for us to actively assert the covenant, to do the work it takes to keep a relationship and promise steady and solid. The story in the book of Hosea that we read in the Haftorah is not a simple one, but it's about the reestablishing of a covenant, the rebuilding of a covenant, the intensity of the work required to make such a promise lasting. There's no promise that will continue to exist without effort, is another way of saying this, even between people and God. Certainly between people and this earth. Every promise, even marriage, even love, requires ongoing effort. The commitments we make in their first blush of love, they're beautiful. But the real beauty is in sustaining those promises, is intending to the relationship, be that between people or between people and God. The words that Rabbi Springer closes with are really beautiful, so I'm just going to quote her. The sacred partnership with another human being echoes our sacred partnership with God. When we know another person in loving relationship and respect that we cannot take that relationship for granted, then we become motivated to make the choices that keep the relationship vital. We must do the same in our relationship with the divine. May we be so blessed, friends, to tend to the relationships that matter, so that we can keep alive that faith that birthed them in the first place. That can be true between us and God, and that can absolutely, I bless us that it is absolutely true in our loving relationships too. May we tend to them with our whole hearts and find ourselves well met by loving partners. Let's go. Bless you, friends. See you tomorrow.